If you're playing the game when Heizo came out, you might remember general discussion said, he's a fine unit himself, but Sucrose and Kazuha are better supports. Jin and Sayu can heal, Zhao does more damage. He wasn't bad, but he got outdone on every front and couldn't really find a niche apart from the people who played him because they wanted to. Mizuki's like that, except she's also worse than Heizo. Hello. Okay, that's a hell of a way to start off a video, but before we get into her actual kit, let me give two justifications for that opinion. First off, I am always just going to be more lenient and generally more positive when it comes to 4 stars because they are theoretically easier to obtain. So if Mizuki was a 4-star, I would maybe be a little more generous and not call her worse than Heizo. She is a standard banner 5 stars, so she is going to be easier to get than other 5 stars, but still not nearly as common as 4 stars. Second is, I very much value Animo for its flexibility. There are so many types of teams that make very good use of Animo units, and sometimes Animo units like Sayu here have elemental absorptions, which can change what type of damage they're doing, which is very interesting and can be used in a lot of different ways. I think she is in contention for worst Animo unit in the game because outside of the crit DPSs, she is easily the least flexible. She has a lot of limitations, and she doesn't bring enough to a team to make up for those. What do I mean by that? Let's look at her kit and find out. Normal attacks are pretty useless like they have been for her past few units. We're actually going to skip over her skill for the time being and go straight to her burst, because parts of her skill don't make sense unless you understand what her burst does first. It does one initial Animo hit that doesn't actually deal very much damage at all, and it says it pulls in nearby objects and opponents. I don't know how strong or for how long that is. Since recording this, the 5.4 special program has aired and we have gotten official footage of Mizuki. The initial hit seems to stagger pretty hard, and then the pull after that is also pretty strong, but they only showed it off on mushrooms, so we'll have to see if it is good at grouping larger enemies. Then after the initial hit, it creates a mini Baku, a little summon. He follows your active character and he creates Wait, I didn't read this before trying to describe the skill. Yumemi style special snacks. This mini Baku will follow your character around and it'll create snacks on the ground that you have to pick up. Pretty similar to Yaya with her radishes, where throws them on the ground and after a little bit they will explode on their own and deal damage to enemies. They'll also explode if enemies walk into them, but if your characters walk into them, you'll get healed. Mizuki's snacks are a little different. They kind of work on C0 Bennett burst rules, where if you're below 70% HP, they'll heal you, but if you're above 70% HP, they'll explode like they would if you left them alone. This explosion damage is very, very low. This is not a reliable source of damage. Although to clear things up, she's a swirl-based DPS. She's not meant to do a lot of talent damage. This mostly exists to help her trigger more reactions. Her healing, along with the rest of her kit, is based on her elemental mastery, which is pretty much the only stat that you want to be building for her. Energy recharge until you have enough to get her burst up consistently, and then all EM after that. This healing is single target, and it looks to be a little low. Your standard high investment Mizuki build is going to have somewhere in the range from 800 to 1000 elemental mastery, with a 235% multiplier and an extra 700 flat healing at talent level 10. Even with 1000 EM, that's only doing about 3000 healing tick. Granted, if Mizuki herself is the one who picks it up, the healing is doubled. As a point of comparison, we can throw this up against the next premier single target healer, which is Shilinen. Admittedly, this is a heavily healing focused build. I have a lot of def, I have a healing bonus circlet, but I do only have her burst at level 8. And at level 8, with this build, I'm healing 7,500 a tick every other second. We do have to wait and see how fast the mini Baku creates its snacks, because that obviously affects the rate at which she damages and heals. Alright, we've seen the footage, I timed it. The Baku creates a snack every 2 seconds. So that basically means that when she is on field, she heals around as much as Shilinen. Depending on your build, it might be a bit less or a bit more. And when she is off field, she's healing about half as much as Shilinen. So far, none of this has been particularly awful. The numbers are a bit low and it seems a little clunky, but she's a standard banner character. What do you expect? It only gets really bad when we start looking at the skill. She weaves memories of lovely dreams, entering a dream drifter state where she can float around and she repeatedly pulses with anemo damage. Correction, I thought it was going to work like Pyro Traveler's tap skill, where she is the center of the AoE and she constantly emits anemo damage in all directions. Actually, it's more like Pyro Traveler's hold skill, where she automatically shoots off these little clouds that seek enemies and deal damage with the AoE centered on them. I'd say that's both an upside and a downside. She doesn't have to get as close to enemies as I thought she would, but she also has a lot less control over where her AoE is. She gets 2 other buffs. The collection radius for the special snacks from her burst is increased, so she has an easier time picking them up and healing or damaging from them. And it buffs the swirl damage of all nearby party members, although that's usually just her, by her elemental mastery. Meaning that for swirl damage, she basically gets to double dip. The buff is fine. It's not horrible. It's not great. When you're in AoE scenarios, you're certainly going to feel it, but it's not a strong enough buff to make swirl like a viable single target reaction that does 100,000 damage. It also says it has a 5-second duration, but that's a lie. Her A1 passive increases it to 10 seconds. It does require you to trigger swirl 2 times while it is active, but I think you can figure out how to do that. Anyways, that's it. Her kit is fairly simple. It's a pretty easy loop. Do your burst so you can get out the Baku, that'll give you extra damage and healing if you need it, and then float around in her skill as an anemo driver for 10 seconds. Maybe you're asking me, like, why is this character so bad? What is so horrible about this? She's certainly not the best at anything. She does kind of low damage. She doesn't do the best healing. But these are all still good traits, and adding them all together will make a good character, right? And she probably would be okay if this is where the video stopped, but sadly it continues from here. Because the big thing about her skill is that she can't use normal or charged attacks while she's in it. And while that doesn't knock out a ton of teammates, it does knock out a lot of what would be her best. Like Beto, as an on-fielder who groups and likes doing a lot of AoE damage, Beto would have been a great slot. Can't get value from things like Fischl C6. If you wanted to use Toma for some reason, he's out of the question. More notably, it knocks out Xingqiu and Yelan, meaning that your only Hydra option that's going to deal reasonable damage is Farina. But this brings me on to my second point, where even though she is probably going to be linked at the hip to Farina, I expect her to have some pretty substantial anti-synergy. I could be wrong on this, but I think Mizuki is going to be uniquely horrible at building fanfare. Why is this? Well, that comes down to this. This passive talent makes it so that whenever one of your party members overheals, Farina heals your entire party by a small amount. It helps single target healers a lot with building fanfare. Her summons also deal more damage based on how many characters in your party are above 50% HP. So this passive also lets single target healers keep that part of her skill up. So this passive is really what makes single target healers function in Farina teams, and Mizuki is going to be horrible at triggering it. Characters like Shilanen or even Kuki have no condition to their healing. Even if you're at full health, the skill will attempt to heal, and then if they overheal, this passive will be triggered. Mizuki is not the same. She has this limitation where your characters have to be below 70% HP if you want the healing to proc. You're gonna have to be able to heal from 70% to 100% or over with just one snack. Because if you go from 70% to 99, tough nuts. No endless waltz for you, and you have to wait for Farina's summons to drain you back down below 70% HP before you can try to heal again. And even if you do get the overheal, you're still gonna have to wait. And because the base multiplier of her healing is so low and it only becomes decent if it's picked up by her and doubled, I honestly can't see her bringing a character from below 70% to overhealed unless it's her. She's a single target healer who only heals herself for a reasonable amount and is bad at proccing endless waltz. There are only 2 other characters who have this type of limitation. The first one is the aforementioned Yao Yao, who, does it actually say here? All that changes based on what HP you're at is who is targeted. No matter what, the radishes will always attempt to heal and attempt to deal damage. And whether it does damage or heal is just dependent on who is in the AoE of the explosion. If it's an ally, they'll get healed. If it's an opponent, they'll get damaged. And that is completely ignoring her burst, which doesn't have this limitation and is a full party heal. The other unit who has this limitation and is somewhat harmed by it is Bennett. This one is a lot more like Mizuki's healing. He just literally cannot heal you unless you're below 70% HP. And he even has a similar mechanic where the burst will only heal if you're below 70% and it will only attack boost if you're above 70%. But that's solved by C1. So as for the limitation on the healing, this is Bennett. If Bennett didn't heal at all, he would still be good. He also has way more healing than Mizuki and is better at overhealing. Bennett is a absolute mess of balancing, but I will unironically say that this is a reasonable downside. It is not a reasonable downside for Mizuki, who can barely do a tenth of what Bennett can do. I'm being mean. I'm being really mean. I don't usually do constellations on 5 stars, but Mizuki is the standard character. There's a realistic chance that even as a free-to-play or low spender, you can get cons on her. C1 works in a bit of a weird way, but at the end of the day, all it is an extra swirl damage buff. Just like the one included in her base kit, it's not gonna make swirls into nukes, but you're definitely gonna notice the difference in AoE. Her C2 is actually pretty good, and I expect this to be, I think, her second best constellation. It's a buff to all your nearby party members based on how much EM she has. Since she's an animo character, her main role is to swirl and decrease the elemental res on enemies. Buffing your party members is pretty good. C3 slightly increases the swirl buff that she gives, and C5 slightly increases her healing. I wouldn't go crazy over either of them. Neither is useless, but neither is very good either. C4 is what I think is going to be her best. It is Bennett and Sayu's C1. It makes it so that whenever you pick up a snack, it will simultaneously deal damage and heal, which just kind of solves all of her issues in Farina teams. And it also gives her up to 20 energy, makes her burst a lot cheaper. Number 6 lets swirls crit, 30% crit rate, 100% crit damage. We're gonna have to wait for her to come out and get theory crafters to do actual calcs on this. It sounds good for her personal DPS, but she is not the one dealing the majority of damage in your team, so it's kind of whatever in my mind. Now that I'm done ripping her to shreds, let's turn around and take a look at a few of the teams that I think she could be interesting in. And I have Sayu here because Sayu is fundamentally a very similar unit to Mizuki, but she's about 10 times better in nearly every way. I'm exaggerating, but like, Jesus Christ, is Sayu just like a non-headache version of Mizuki. Her burst also does healing and damage, but notably it starts off with a full party heal, and if you have her C1, it will simultaneously always damage and heal. And she also has a sort of similar skill where she enters a state, starts moving around, and she can't use normal or charge attacks. So that's why I have chosen Sayu to represent Mizuki today, because in my opinion, she's just gonna be a worse Sayu. The main team that I would consider using her in is this one, Farina Aura on electrocharge. Aside from her limitations as a unit, she has limitations as an animo character. Swirl is a very good reaction, but it's a very spammy one. If you're triggering a lot of swirls, it's difficult to keep up certain auras on your enemies, which in teams like Vape or Melt that want specific auras to get reactions, that's bad. And other times it can be difficult to get swirls of multiple elements and get the correct res shred on enemies. So not a lot of teams generally want an animo on-fielder who's gonna trigger a lot of swirls. One of those exceptions is electrocharge. Electrocharge is pretty unique in that the auras don't cancel each other out. When your enemies are taking electrocharge damage, they're considered to be affected by both hydro and electro, and you can swirl both easily. The aura on Farina synergy is actually a pretty powerful one that I have been liking a lot, and he doesn't require normal attacks, so here he is. For your 4th slot, you have a few options, but I would go for an electro unit. Throwing Raiden on an EM build to trigger electro charges could work, or throwing her on tenacity to make her a buffer can also work. You could also technically use her as like a dual DPS because Mizuki's skill only lasts 10 seconds at most, and Farina has a 20-second cooldown on her skill. Slide in, press Q, get the initial hit on her burst, and then swap out. Dori is a potential option that applies a lot of electro. An option that a lot more people would probably be inclined to use is Kuki. She gets a little bit of healing from elemental mastery, so going full EM to trigger electrocharges with her can work. Lisa would probably actually be a fairly compelling option now that I think of it. Defense doesn't affect transformative reaction damage like elemental resist does, so this isn't going to increase the damage of your electrocharges, but you still have significant talent damage going on this team between Auron and Farina, so this is nice. She has an 80 cost burst? Jesus, I didn't know that. But the option that I'm going to use today, the one that you all saw coming, is Fischl. She's probably the premium option in this slot. Depending on how field time stuff plays out, it's either her or Yumemizuki. First, we'll start off in admittedly an incredibly unfavorable scenario for this team. I'm basically just going to play out her rotation as I would, but do it with Sayu. Actually, what is the duration of her burst? Because theoretically what you can do is like burst first and let it heal your off-fielders while you're going through your rotation. Yeah. Oh, I got a pyro throw by accident. So yeah, these are world bosses that I'm fighting here, but you can see that this isn't a bad team by any means. Is it being carried by Farina? Perhaps. Oh, wait. I didn't even realize that I didn't have Fab on Farina this whole time. My Farina's just that cracked. Oh no. I'm not gonna heal her because I don't know what happened to my NRE, so kill it. Thank you. Is this an exact replica of how Mizuki will play? No. And as I said, she might honestly be a little bit worse. But I think it's a reasonable enough approximation that we can get an idea for her performance. So this is a much better scenario for this team, an AoE scenario. Can you tell what's going on? Not really. Is that the sign of a good electrocharge team? Yes. Could also check out the bishops. I imagine this will be a very good team for killing bishops. Even better, I have no idea what's happening here. Oh, I got knocked out. I have to check. I had to check because I thought of it. Mizuki isn't stated to have any interruption resistance in her kit, so it's possible that that can happen to her. I don't know, it's fine. That actually might be a situation in which Mizuki is a little bit better than Sayu, because her increased AoE will matter more. So 99% of the time, she is going to be used in electrocharge. But I actually did have, I think, just one other team that I cared to show about. This is not supposed to be Xinyan. This is supposed to be mavuika. Technically, an option you could do here is Xiangling, but solo Pyro Xiangling is physically painful to deal with, so if I had mavuika, I would probably use her instead. PMC might be a better stand-in here. He works in a more similar way. Alright, well, it has to be unfreezable enemies, I guess. The idea here is it's like a mavuika vape melt team, something. Please don't bully me. It's very hard to come up with themes for a character who can't use normal attacks. Maybe I put Traveler on Festering Desire in this team. You know, honestly, that's not the worst idea I've ever had. There we go. Okay, alright. Functional. I can rotate with that better. I might honestly keep playing around with this variant. The mavuika variant is definitely way better, like not even close. Although that is a very, very premium team. 3 5-star units that just came out, plus Farina. Don't get Pyro. Thank you. 14k melt. I gotta do the burst again. Man, I would be so bad at Mizuki. So those are 2 potential ways that you can use Mizuki. Is Mizuki gonna be a great driver? No. Is she gonna be a great buffer? Also no. Is she gonna be a great healer? Again, no. But you know what she will be? Extremely comfy and easy to play. Like, she's a character who floats around and automatically deals damage and heals herself. Her optimal rotation is 2 button presses, Q, E. And does that have value? Abso-fucking-lutely. Hell, I mean, that's basically what Baizhu is. Baizhu is one of my favorite characters, and 99% of the time, he is just worse than the other Dendro options. He doesn't have a lot of offensive capability. Even as someone who does dumb stuff like Stethos Overload and Abyss, or like Lali Kanich stuff, or even as someone who just enjoys playing Linny in the first place, even though I enjoy doing a lot more skill-intensive and complex teams, sometimes I just want to play Sino and I don't want to get hit, and Baizhu is there for me. That's all from me. If you like Mizuki for whatever reason, if you like how she plays, if you like how she looks, if you like how she sounds, do not let me dissuade you from getting her. Just because a unit is worse than other units doesn't mean you shouldn't play them. I love Kujo Sara. Kujo Sara is one of my favorite units. I have her crowned. She sucks. She's like objectively worse than most other buffers. If you love Mizuki, keep loving Mizuki. And I hope you get C2 fast. Anyways, if you like the video, you can leave a like. If you like me, you can subscribe. And I'll see y'all in the next video, which actually will be the Lanyan video this time. I really wanted this video to be more positive, but then I started reading her kit.